for balance of power, and that's that. And I
Testing,
can do
testing.
14
1, 2,
variations
3.
on whatever theme you would like, but I am not doing it different. I'm not okay with it. I get it, I understand.
Usually I just mute it until we start. So that'd be great.
I understand completely. And I've got a piece of paper with a 43% race rate. That's my, and I'm gonna hand that out. But
It's a very rainy day in New York City.
Good start.
It's our new member having trouble pouring, but we'll introduce you in.
Because it's water.
I think we have a little water
I
problem.
tell you.
Hold on.
Why, yeah.
All right, welcome to, this is our last commission meeting. I'd like to make some announcements about how today will go. First, I'd like to announce that Gary Johnson has left the commission, has resigned from the commission, and Governor Cuomo has replaced him with Robert Megna. Welcome, Bob, from all the other commission members. And unfortunately, Mitra had to be at meetings in Europe and will not be present at today's meeting. So we will proceed with the present group. Let me make a couple of other announcements. First of all, I want to make clear how the voting today will have to go for us to come to a conclusion. The statute that creates us says that we have to report by today what our conclusions are, and if we don't reach any conclusions, we will report that as well. The findings and recommendations of the commission must be supported by a majority vote, and with regard to executive and legislative compensation, which we are now going to be discussing, it must be supported by at least one member appointed by each appointing authority. So there is a member, 3 members appointed by the governor, 1 member appointed by the Senate leader, 1 member appointed by the Assembly leader, 2 members appointed by the Chief Judge of New York, including myself, the chair of the commission, but pursuant to the legislation on these issues of legislative and executive compensation, the chair does not have a vote, so I do not have a vote. So I will try to hear everyone out, and we will take a vote on various issues that come up. But I think you now understand what the votes would have to be and how we get there will be part of this discussion today. So with that, let's start. Fran, do you want to begin?
What I'd like to do is read a statement to my fellow commission members and to everyone listening, and for the record, on behalf of the appointees of the executive, Bob Megna, Mitra, Hormozy, and myself. The New York State Commission on Legislative, Judicial, and Executive Compensation was today to offer its final report on legislative and executive salaries. From the beginning of this stage of our work last January, there appeared to be a general consensus among all the members regarding the need for a substantial increase in executive compensation for agency heads. We discussed at length a number of approaches and no doubt would have reached a final agreement. Further, regarding the executive, what remained to be had was discussion, deliberation, and a decision regarding any compensation increase for the state controller and attorney general. However, as regards the legislature, there has never been, nor is there today, a consensus on the issue of a legislative salary increase. Between January and September, the Commission held public hearings in New York City and Albany, at which it heard testimony from members of the public, good government groups, the chairman of the commission that investigated and recommended a salary increase for the New York City Council, Frederick A.O. Schwartz, Jr., and 2 members of the state legislature. We also received a considerable amount of written testimony and many emails and letters. At the direction of the members, Commission staff reached out to and gathered relevant information from academia. And finally, the Commission reviewed relevant materials, including national and regional inflation rates, legislative compensation data from other states, and recent compensation history for our own state government. Unfortunately, however, no institutional representative of either the Assembly or Senate testified before the Commission, despite our making every effort to accommodate such testimony. We believe, and have stated repeatedly and publicly, that any consideration of a legislative compensation increase must be informed both by such institutional legislative testimony and the opportunity for Commission members to question the legislature's representatives. Our legislature-appointed Commission colleagues, and more recently, legislative leaders, opposed such participation. They argued that the Commission was created, quote, to remove this discussion from politics, unquote, and that consideration, quote, be based on objective economic factors, unquote.
He's asking that we turn off our cell.
We believe this notion, we believe,
Turn off your cell phone.
oh, I'm sorry. We believe this notion to be deeply flawed. The legislature's position is to deny the very essence of representative democracy. While the actual decisions rest with the independent commission, those seeking increases have an obligation to make their case to the commission, but more importantly, the public they were elected to serve. The judiciary understood this, as did the executive. As to the objective economic factors that we are charged to consider, New York State legislative salaries are already the third highest in the United States, exceeded only by those of California and Pennsylvania. Our state per diems are the highest in the nation, and the additional allowances received by virtually the entire state Senate and 2/3 of the state Assembly increase many salaries beyond those of California and Pennsylvania. Outside income can and has given rise to real and perceived conflicts of interest. The Commission heard testimony from members of the public, and the sentiment was virtually unanimous against any raises for the legislators. The legislators' position is that the opinion of the public is irrelevant, and they dismiss it as political influence. We believe the opinion of the public is entirely relevant, if not determinative, because the public is, in the truest definition of the word, the employer. Obviously, the employer's view on the employee's performance and merit is incredibly important. But the public is not the only voice to which the Commission should listen, nor has it been. For one thing, their opposition is largely institutional in nature, rather than a reflection of how they feel about their respective legislators, most of whom are dedicated, hard-working public servants. And it is unfortunate that the good legislators who work full-time, ably and honestly represent their constituents, and most assuredly deserve a raise, will suffer because there is a refusal to right systemic wrongs. The Commission purposely waited to begin its deliberations until after the 2016 legislative session in hopes that the legislature would finally address these issues. Even the New York City Council, which recently enacted a pay increase to $148,000, recognized the need to for a cap on outside income, as does the United States Congress. Banning outside income is overwhelmingly supported by the public and good government groups as a way to ensure that elected officials are working solely for their constituents without any competing interests. The State Assembly has supported limiting outside income, whereas the State Senate has opposed the same. The Assembly, however, missed this opportunity to forcibly argue their position to the public, and has never pressed the Senate to reform outside income. A state legislature with real limits on outside income would have made a much stronger case for meriting a raise. That said, we believe there is still the possibility of achieving both meaningful reform and recommending a legislative salary increase, but not as a result of any action taken by this Commission today. Rather, we, the appointees of the executive, will refrain from voting on any recommendations that may be put forth by our colleagues, so that no recommendations and/or report can be issued at this time. And we hope our fellow commissioners will follow suit. This will give the Assembly and Senate the opportunity to meet before year's end and pass the reforms demanded by their constituents. We recognize that going 17 years without an increase legitimately puts a financial strain on the majority of legislators who rely solely on their government salary. As such, subject to further discussions and deliberations, the executive's appointees could consider a modest increase. However, anything more than that would need to address the public's concern and opposition by making the position effectively full-time and limiting outside income. Accordingly, should the legislature pass reforms that mirror those of the United States Congress, including a cap on outside income, we are prepared to recommend and approve at a reconvened meeting of this commission a salary substantially higher than any discussed so far by this commission, taking into consideration congressional and New York City Council salaries. And at that same meeting, we would finish our work by recommending formally an increase for the executive along the lines we have already discussed, or other alternatives, including tying it to performance. There is precedent for such an action. Governor George Pataki was correct in 1999 to include legislative performance measures, and that principle should be extended and strengthened. We believe the American public made its lack of faith in government institutions clear in last week's election. Here in New York State, we believe that we have an opportunity to restore that faith. We stand ready to reconvene with the Commission prior to year's end if the committee as a whole signals its desire to continue this conversation and progress is made. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Fran. Yes.
I don't know exactly where to begin, except to say that the reason there is a legislature is to resist the king. And that's why it was first created. That's why it exists. And that's what I just think I heard. Do it my way or don't do it at all. I'm going to make a proposal. The proposal I make is a modest one. Increase the legislative salaries, the executive salaries, the salaries for the statewide elected officials, and I would recommend that we also suggest to the executive and the legislature a salary increase for the governor and the lieutenant governor, which is outside our jurisdiction, but all be the same. And that increase would be 2.154% annually since the last raise, and rounded off to the nearest $500 to make it kind of like neat. But all of them increased the same. All of them increased by the cost of living. That's not a raise. That's keeping the salaries consistent with what it is that all the rest of state government, all the rest of the state has seen, which is a modest 2% or so increase. The reason I think those things are relevant, and I'm going to pass out a piece of paper to the commission members that simply does that for everyone, but I understand the bigger picture, and we may not get to this detail. But nevertheless, the Consumer Price Index is a relevant standard. It's what everyone thinks about as cost of living. It's increased over the years. The number is 2.154% since 2000, and that's the last time, the year after the last raise for these people. It's, less than 1% the last year. I think that's a reasonable thought to incorporate, but it keeps the cost of living in a reasonable range for people who work for the government. It doesn't change the relative status of anyone. The commissioners go up, the Comptroller goes up, the legislature goes up. It doesn't change the balance of power. The balance of power is part of the question, and it needs to be incorporated in whatever it is that we recommend. The comptroller and AG are kind of an unusual situation in New York. They head state agencies, but they're elected statewide. The current status says they should be paid more than the top level commissioners, the A commissioners in statute. I would keep that the same. With respect to the legislature, we got testimony in the form of a written statement from a professor, Professor Squire, who studies these things in a lot of different contexts. He said one of the things we should consider is making the pay enough that we can actually let these people do things like support their own family. That thought shouldn't be such that these people are presented with choices between doing their job and doing other things. I think that's a good thought. The demands of the job are such that no one can have a kind of normal job except to be full-time in the legislature. If you think about the kind of schedule that's official, which is the schedule related to legislation, which is only part of the job, well, gee, I don't know of an employer that would be willing to take someone who says, gee, for the next 6 months, I don't think I can show up at all. And, oh, yeah, maybe periodically I can show up in the other 6 months. That's not a normal situation. That's pretty close to a requirement that you take this as your job. I think that's part of the deal. You run for office. If you're successful and you are elected, your commitment is to be in Albany, not wherever you're from, for 6 months of the year, guaranteed. And then, as needed, the rest of the year. I don't know of an employer in a regular job who can say, that's okay. So who is it that could do that? If that's the definition. 6 months of the year you're gone, some of the time you're available. Well, if you're independently wealthy, you can do that. If you're like me and you're retired, you could do that. If you're a small business person or a professional where you set the job requirements, I guess you could do that. But that ends up being a really strange mix of people, and certainly not representative of the people in the state. I think we want people who are representative of people in the state. I think that's part of what it means to say representative government. So let's not define it in a way that says, I don't think so. Let's make you be unusual, independently wealthy, proprietor of your own business, or old people like me. I don't think that's a good system. I think we need to make it possible for people to say, I support my family, and I make enough money that I can get by, and I'm not independently wealthy. That's what a decent salary would require. And, oh, by the way, I want to get good people. So when we think about human resource systems, we think about what it is that's required. Well, a good job description, a reasonable work environment, and a competitive salary. A salary that says this is an attractive job. I'm not sure what that number is exactly, but I know in metropolitan New York, an $80,000 a year job doesn't get the best people available, doesn't get the best people from all walks of life. It doesn't work. And whether it's New York City literally or the New York City metropolitan area, I don't think there's much of a difference there, but $80,000 doesn't do it. And if $80,000 did it in 1999, 2.5% per year since then, that's pretty close, whatever that number turns out to be. That having been said, I think if you look at other governments, whether they be city council in the city of New York or city councils in other big cities throughout the country, or whether you look at comparable kinds of situations in what in the academic world is called subnational, regional, whatever you want to call it, states is what we would call it in the US. We look at those kind of situations in the developed world. The numbers that are the 120-ish thousand that results, put you on the low end. It's not comparable. It's not good enough. I think we've got to deal with the notion that since before there was a government in New York, governors have said, oh, legislatures don't pay them. That's a statement that was reported by Professor Squire, who was one of the experts that responded to us when we asked the academic world. He noted in 1710, a governor said in New York, don't pay them. Well, that's what the governor here is saying too. I think that's off. When we think about performance of the legislature, we think about the fact that the assignment to the legislature is to deal with the questions that we as a society disagree about. I can point to a whole bunch of things that have been accomplished that the governor has identified as major accomplishments in the last few years during the administration that's the current one. Things like gay marriage, things like gun control, those are things we disagreed about. I had a view. I'm glad my view happens to be the one that in the end got supported. But we disagreed about them. It's not a question of right or wrong. It's a question of disagreement and resolution. How do we do the resolution thing? That's a problem if our standard is performance in the typical ways of thinking about performance. That's what legislatures do. They reflect that societal disagreement. They try to resolve. Sometimes they are not successful. Sometimes it takes years. In the case of gay marriage, for example, well, that's something that the state assembly was willing to come to an agreement amongst itself years and years ago. It took decades for the society at large to come to an agreement. This is the right way to proceed. I don't think it matters what I think. I think the point was present those differences, resolve those differences when the society is ready to resolve them. That's a really complicated assignment. That's not something that we know how to deal with. We don't have good metrics for. We don't know what to do about it. So I'm not sure how we deal with that except to say we need good people. So we need good people. Human resource standards say, so pay them well. Attract good people. Get those good people to stay. Let them learn the job. Let them learn the issues. Let them figure out what to do. And let that disagreement be part of what it is that we do, and let that disagreement resolve itself if that resolution is possible. And if it's not, then let's not. But let's not evaluate them any other way. So, good people. How do we get good people? You have to pay them. If we have to look at this in a reasonable way, we have to look at this in the form of, ooh, how do we get good people? Well, part of that is pay them. And in the case of the legislature, with this kind of goofy schedule, pretty much full-time for part of the year. And expectation that it's actually full-time the rest of the year, even though we don't say it. Because we expect that we can call them up, we can say to them, hey, I have a problem. I didn't get proper treatment at DMV. I didn't get proper treatment in the Office of Mental Health. I need somebody to be my advocate. You're it. That's why I elected you. You're in that job. Take care of this for me. Help me with this. We don't put a 24-hour clock on that. We don't put a 10-hour clock on that. We don't say that's from January to June. We don't say anything about the limitation on that. We expect them to be available to us. That's why we elected them. That's what we did in the election. That's the point of it. Be available and help me. So the job is represent me, be my advocate, make laws as appropriate, like change the law with respect to who you can marry, change the law with respect to who can have a gun, change the law, fill in the blank. That's the job. But since you and I disagree about that, well, figure it out. Help me figure it out. That's the job. Wow. 24/7 doesn't even come close to describing what that job is. I want good people in the legislature. I want good people in the court system. I want good people in the agencies. Cost of living has actually increased since 2000. That's a long time ago. If you look at what the academics look at, what the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the official repository of this information, what they said is, since 2000, it's increased by 43.67%. I can be real precise about that. They're not my numbers. I can noodle about whether they did it exactly right, but that's a long time ago. That's a big increase, but it's not very much if you look at it annually. 2+%. I think all of the government officials, whether they be the legislature, whether they be the elected statewide, whether they be the agency commissioners, they need a raise. We need good people. We know in the one place where we kind of keep track of this stuff that we can't get good people to take the job of being agency commissioners. About a third of the agencies don't have people willing to take the job. The governor tries to attract people, he's unsuccessful. Third, if I do that kind of arithmetic, what I find is, the A commissioners, I'm not proposing to change any of the relationships. I think that would be beyond what we should be doing here. I might want to argue that some of them should be paid more, some of them should be paid less. But the A commissioners, that's a group described in a paragraph of law. They're people like the agency, Department of Transportation, Department of Education, Department of Mental Health. Those A commissioners, their salary is $136,000 in law. Let's increase it by the cost of living. Let's make it 195,000. Round it to the nearest 500, and it's 195,500. The F commissioners, another paragraph of law, A through F, the head of the APA. An agency, I think, should be taken more seriously than F in the state, but that's where it is. It's 90,000 today. It should go to 129,500. I don't know that that will guarantee you'll get the best people available. I don't know that for 129,000, I'm willing to do the work of the Commissioner of APA. I know that as a personal matter, the answer would have been no. I don't think that's enough. It's a hard job. I think that maybe we can do a better job of attracting people than we can at 90. Wow. Let's do something about that. Let's increase it. Let's not get crazy. 2%, 2.15 is what I'm suggesting. So increase everyone by the cost of living from what they are. That means for the legislature, from 150 members in the Assembly, 63 members in the Senate. Well, let's increase that from 79.5 to 114,000. Wow. Really big raise. That's what it sounds like, except it's been nearly 20 years, 2%. That doesn't sound so big. It's less than what PEF got as a negotiated salary. It's about what the management confidential employees who are not unionized and not represented by anyone, that's about what they do. It's less than what I had suggested earlier. It's important that we think about it as something across the board so as to not change the balance of power between the executive and the legislature. I think it's awful that the governor wants to be king. I think it's awful that the governor's representatives here think that he should be king. I would like to recommend that everyone get an increase. I would like to recommend that everyone get an increase that is not tied to anything except for the fact that we need good people. We can go through the litany of things to consider, but mostly we have to think about how we get good people. And I think that anything else is a disservice to the public. I understand that when we ask about the institution of the legislature, the public says no. When we ask about to anything, they're bad people. That's what we think. That's the nature of the beast. Because when we look at our individual representatives, we know that they're good people. We're the people we individually elect. And I would like to note that in order to get better people, in order to get them to a place where they can learn what's required, they can disagree with their staff, they can disagree with the governor, they can criticize proposals of the governor. They need to know things. They need to have experience. They need to be competent people. So good people to begin with, and let them learn some things by keeping them in the job for a while if the people that elect them agree with that. And when they disagree with that, they elect somebody else. That's the nature of a democratic system and a representative system. And it says my local issues count for more than most other people think about. That's why I want somebody to give voice to my view. That's what they're there to do. And that means disagreeing or criticizing or agreeing with what the executive has to say. And let's have really good people running the agencies. I want competent people. at the Department of Health. I want competent people at the Department of Transportation. I want better people than we would get for the salaries that we're currently paying. I think that's really important. And so my proposal is simple. 2.15% annualized over the 17 years since the last increase. And I've handed out a piece of paper that says, here's what that means for groups of agencies, here's what that means for the legislature, here's what that means for the stipends that go with responsible positions in the legislature. As a practical matter, given the number of people we're talking about, it's really modest compared to the size of the state budget. So I don't think it's a question of affordability. I don't think it's a question of unreasonability. I think it's a question of being reasonable and thinking about how you get and retain good people. And I think anything other than that is a mistake.
Roman, can I, you've been going for some time, and I think
Really?
the proposal is on the table, but I know that some of the other commissioners who haven't spoken yet would like to, talk to your proposal perhaps, and to other things, and we'll get back to you.
I would like to just make it be formal as a proposal.
Okay. It is.
2.15% annualized for the last
Can I make a
17
personal
years.
observation real quick?
No, could you just wait, and I'll get back to you?
Across the board.
Let the people who haven't
Well,
spoken yet.
I haven't spoken yet.
Well, Mr. Leck is next.
Oh,
Thank you. I certainly have no problem agreeing with Roman on what he presented in terms of the absolute percentages for a raise. I will not be very long, but I'll point out that in 1999, when the legislature, December 18th, 1998, when the legislature voted for a raise agreed to by the governor without any kind of a commission or anything else, which went into effect in 1999, at a salary then of $79,500. We've all talked about, well, 2%, 40 odd, this is what it comes to. Look at it the other way. What's the worth of that $79,500 today, which the legislature and the governor agreed to in 1999, and you'll find that it's way under $50,000 a year in 2016 money, which in effect means that's what the salary of today's member of the New York State Legislature is, way under $50,000 a year, voted for in 79.5 in 1999. I don't think that's proper. I got to tell you, I was first elected to the state senate in 1978, and I spent 24 years there, and I've watched a whole progression of how the state legislature has changed since then. When I first got elected to the state legislature, some of the women members of the legislature who I know told me when they first got elected, way before me, they were criticized if they wore pants on the floor of the state senate or the state assembly and weren't wearing a dress. The first week I was there, I was informed that there was a black tie Senate dinner to honor all new members. I had to go rent a tuxedo. I was the youngest member of the majority. Didn't have one. That, of course, has gone long by the wayside. But a lot of other traditions, including the vast majority of the legislature, Senate as well as Assembly, having outside jobs outside of the legislature. According to my calculations, and anybody can find that out just by looking at the financial disclosure statements that are submitted each year by every member of the legislature, a majority of both the Senate and the Assembly have indicated they are full-time members of the legislature already, without any other incursions, anything to do with outside income limitations or anything else. This is their job. This is what they do. They are full-time members. Translation is the Senate and the Assembly has advanced great steps, at least since I was first elected, and we should be respectful of that. So I will agree with what Roman has suggested in terms of the percentages. I think they're certainly fair, and they represent only, in effect, an inflationary increase brought about, of course, by the political impossibility of having to be able to vote for a raise for yourself. Having been elected 12 times and faced this many times in the legislature, I understand the complexity of it. even though I never agreed with it and always announced publicly that I would vote for a salary increase, I understand the consternation of then my fellow colleagues in the legislature to say, well, we don't know, back away from it, problems with the executive, whatever it might be. We've now gotten to the point where 79.5 in 1999 appears to be $48,000 in 2016, and to bring it up to where it was supposed to be equal in 1999 is figures that Roman has passed out. I think we should go with that. I know that the legislature, as I've watched this past election, and I've watched the editorial process that's going on and everything else, over the next couple of years we'll be faced with handling some of the issues in which Fran and others have brought up, and I assume we'll respond to that. If we can't, and Fran and her colleagues have announced that they're not going to vote for anything today, well, okay, that means that the legislature, unless there's a special session. By the way, Fran and everybody else, special sessions as lame duck sessions after elections have been widely criticized since I first got elected in 1978, and nobody seems to like them. And as far as I know, there has been no pressure or intention of calling a special session of the legislature. Translation, if today goes by and we have done nothing, that come January 1st, the 79,500 figure for the state legislature, the A through F figures for the commissioners will remain the same. The commissioners obviously can be changed at any time. As a political matter, I know as well as everybody else, that will not happen absent a legislative salary, so we're now into 2019 before any of this will be considered again. Quite frankly, I think that's a shame, particularly for the year-and-a-half efforts that we've had to try to repair the damage to that. If we can't do what Roman suggested, then let's come up with a number today in which we can do as a look forward to something happening in 2017 and 18 state legislative sessions that would, in Fran's word, call for the ability for a much larger raise of whatever that might be, come the beginning of the 2018, 20, whatever year that is, I'm losing it, after the next election. Because to do nothing now, once again leaves the legislature and the commissioners in a place that I don't think anybody in this room really, in their soul, really thinks that's where they should be.
Barry, do you want to make any comments?
Our charge under Chapter 60 of the laws of 2015, that law established this special commission as a quadrennial commission to recommend adjustments to the compensation of legislative, statewide elected officials, and executive branch commissioners, as well as the judiciary. And obviously, we have completed our charge with respect to the judiciary. The legislation also includes the factors that should be considered. They are not exclusive factors, but the enumerated factors are the following: the overall economic climate, the rates of inflation, changes in public sector spending, levels of compensation and non-salary benefits received by executive branch officials and legislators, and legislators of other states and the federal government. Levels of compensation and non-salary benefits received by professionals in government, academia, and private and not-for-profit enterprise, and finally, the state's ability to fund increases. Now, I think that Fran Ryder, in her opening statement on behalf of the executive members of this commission, did set forth fairly comprehensively the work that has been carried on by this commission since its inception. And it has, in fact, been substantial with respect to meetings of the commission, all of which have been public meetings, public hearings, as well as the numerous submissions that have been made to the commission. Now, with respect to this question of the factors and considerations, I do want to respond in part to the statement made by Fran Ryder on behalf of the executive members with respect to the superimposition of this factor that the legislature must affirmatively come forward and make their case in order for us to consider any adjustment, any increase with respect to their compensation. Now, it seems to me that that was not contemplated by the legislation. That was not contemplated by Chapter 60. And I think as Roman has set forth, to an extent, the purpose of Chapter 60 was to depoliticize the process in terms of taking it out of the hands of the legislature and out of the hands of the executive and out of the hands of the judiciary with respect to making recommendations for adjustments or increases in compensation. So I want to make that point because I think to indicate that that is the predominant consideration is certainly a distortion of both the legislation and our charge. Now, I would further note that there is a timetable here, and I think it was referred to by Judge Lack. The commission has until November 15, well, I'm sorry, the first part that pertained to the judiciary. But the commission has, of course, here, yes, until November 15 of the year following its establishment, 2015, to do its analysis and produce its report as to legislative and executive branch compensation. The tenure of the commission ends today on November 15, 2016. There is no carryover commission. There is no commission to consider what might take place after today and before the end of the year. And in fact, this commission will have no authority beyond today. Now, why is that important? I believe it's important because part of the language, again, of the enabling chapter is that the commission is to examine, evaluate, and make recommendations with respect to adequate levels of compensation and non-salary benefits. Now, the fact of the matter is, the difficulty I have with the position of the executive members is that it seems to me, and there was mention of the fact that the public, of course, is entitled to a certain amount of accountability. Accountability was referred to, accountability from the members of the legislature to the public. Let me just make this point with respect to public comment. We have acknowledged that with respect to public comment, it has been overwhelmingly disfavorable to increases in legislative compensation. But notwithstanding, I think it's also important to note that what we have received from the public is strictly anecdotal information. Right? Anecdotal information to the extent that, yes, we have heard from dozens of members of the public. I don't even think we've heard from hundreds of members of the public. It certainly cannot be taken as being representative of what the public sentiment is. But my comment with respect to the public is that we, as members of this commission, who accepted appointment to the commission, also have a responsibility to the public. And that responsibility is to discharge the responsibilities, the duties that have been set forth in the enabling legislation. And it seems to me when the position taken by the executive members is one of, we will not support any recommendation with respect to adjustments or increases in legislative salary, that is an abdication of our responsibility to the public and to the appointing officials.
Could vote no.
All right, thank you, Barry.
Bob?
Bob, do you want to say something?
You know, I think people have expressed their points of view across the board. I concur with Fran's comments at the beginning. I would only add, I work with a lot of human resources people every day. And I don't know of one of them that would tell me, give a big raise to somebody who's going to go out and do something else besides that thing. They'd tell me I was crazy. So I think we're not looking at this thing in isolation. We're looking at it as, is there a comprehensive solution to a problem we all admit exists? And Fran, I think, outlined a perfect way to move forward. That's really all I have to say.
Fran?
Yeah. I think there are just a couple of things I want to say. First of all, Barry, we haven't abdicated anything. The three of us, and I know how Mitra feels about this, and she has been among us, and I know that she has spoken to others about it. She has been adamantly opposed to approving any kind of salary increase for the legislature, absent real ethics reform on the legislature's part. So we know how she feels about it. The truth is, whether it was the three of us when Gary was part of this group, or now with Bob, we are individuals. I have to tell you, Roman, that I take enormous exception to the notion that you've put forward that we are somehow upsetting the balance of power by doing the governor's work for him and thereby creating a king. That's insulting, and quite frankly, it shows how little you know, at least about me. I won't speak for anybody else. My opinions during this lengthy process have been my own. I have had no communication with the governor of this state since I left state service, not verbally, not by phone, not by email, not by text, none. So I reject that notion, and quite frankly, I'm insulted by it. I came to these conclusions independent of anyone else, and I believe I speak for my colleagues in saying that this applies to them as well. Doing our duty does not require us to agree with you, nor does it require us to vote for an increase under some set of negotiated circumstances. We've all looked at the same data, we've all done the same research. There has been a difference, though, from day one in terms of how we have thought about executive employees, and I'm not talking about the state controller and the electeds. I'm talking about the commissioners, the agency heads, that they are different than elected officials. They are appointees of an elected official, and he or she, who is the governor at any given time, is responsible for those appointees. They do not report directly to the people. They are not elected by the people. They're appointed. And if the people don't like them or like what they're doing, they should by all means hold the appointing authority responsible for that. In this case, it would be the governor, whoever that would be at any point in time. They are not the same as our elected officials. You talk about quality people. I'm going to tell you something. I spent most of my life in the private sector, but I've spent a good deal of time in the public as well. In any group of people, there are really good people. There are people who are somewhere in the middle, and then there are pretty awful people. That's in the private sector and the public sector. The legislature, I know some really extraordinary people who have served in the state legislature for a very long time, who are wonderful representatives, and have taken their jobs as full-time jobs, and in fact, it applies to many. What is amazing to me in this whole discussion, however, is that if you do that analysis of outside income, which I have done, and sat in front of my computer for several hours looking at all of their reports, I believe there was something around 12 members of the state assembly, and a smaller number, I want to say 6 or 7, 6, that had outside income in the state senate. That the obstinacy of these two bodies in doing the right thing, the thing that the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate did, that the City Council of New York City did, in recognizing that de facto these are full-time jobs, they should be full-time jobs, and we have to do everything possible to ensure that outside negative interests do not come into play in their deliberations. That the two houses of the state legislature refused to do away with the allowance for outside income, which, by the way, has been at the root of almost every corruption scandal that the legislature has seen. Well, certainly many of them. Well, money has certainly been at the root of it, okay?
Would that change the salary structure?
Listen, let me tell you something. The salary structure, if I feel that this is the carrot that's needed to clean up those houses, that's my decision. I have a right to my opinion.
Absolutely.
It is not reflective of the person who appointed me. It's my decision. He may agree with me, and he said he agrees with me, which I think is great, frankly, and a rarity. But that's my opinion. And I have a right not only to express that opinion, but to let it to inform how I will vote on these issues. And let me tell you, you've heard me talk about the need for executive increases. I know better than any of you here, having overseen state agency operations of this government very recently, 2 years ago, I know firsthand the difficulties that these low executive salaries present in the management, the effective management of our government. It's a huge problem.
Hey, I was a bee commissioner.
So
I know my
believe me,
alphabet,
we know
too.
better than anybody here what this means. Here is our point today. I'm going to reiterate it, and then I think we've all made our cases. Judge Kosher has raised the issue that our tenure ends today. If we, in fact, were to take votes where everyone participated, I would agree with him. I would agree that if we actually came to a conclusion on these issues, per the legislation, this commission would be dissolved. However, there is much precedent regarding statutorily created entities like ours, or for that matter, the state legislature, where when they don't meet a deadline, they are allowed to continue. The obvious example is when we don't get an on-time budget. We're supposed to have a budget by the end of March. How many times in our lifetimes have we seen budgets that go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months out? Doesn't mean we don't get a budget, doesn't mean the
But
legislature
that
goes
example
out of
doesn't hold
business.
true with us.
Well, I can debate that, okay? And I think that others may challenge it, and it may be open
Excuse
to,
me, Frank, can I just ask you a question? Do you mean that without any statutory enactment, we can just continue?
till the end of the year, yes. I believe till the end of this calendar year. We are in agreement that we have to do something by the end of the year, okay? I don't want to debate this issue here, okay? We're going to disagree on it, probably. It would ultimately
least.
be, hold on, it would ultimately be something that a court would have to decide. But here's what I know for sure. What I know for sure is that if you make a recommendation today, then we've lost any chance of still trying to reach some kind of agreement and giving the legislature the chance to come back before the end of the year and do what I believe would be the right thing for them to do, which is to recognize the needs of their members, of their respective House members, to recognize the need to do away with outside salaries, or at least cap them substantially, as other legislative bodies have done for exactly the same reasons, and come to an agreement on a salary, quite frankly, as I mentioned, that would far exceed what Roman has put forward. The only chance we have of doing that is to buy more time. Since the executive members are not going to vote today on what Roman or anyone else puts forward, that we sure will go down to defeat. And you will do away with any opportunity for us to consider at one last meeting, sometime before the end of the year, what the legislature may do. They may do nothing. They may never come back into special session. But I'd like to give them that opportunity, because I very much want to give their members a raise. But I go back to this obstinacy that I don't understand, makes no sense to me. It's not in keeping with what other legislative bodies are doing. And it is a serious issue for the three appointees of the executive. So you can put your recommendation forward, Roman, absolutely. The chair can call a vote.
She will.
We will refrain from voting, and that's it. It's over for everybody. Or you can do nothing, see what happens, and then come back in a few weeks and perhaps get something really, really good done for the people of this state. That's it.
Enough of this then. Move the question.
Let me just say something.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. It's okay.
My apologies.
I'm in a terrible position here only because I can't vote, and my opinion for that reason doesn't count. But I can tell you that it's my opinion, based on the statute, that this commission goes out of existence after today. And I have heard from some of the members of this commission that they will not continue to serve after today, including myself. So we are going to vote today, and either up or down. That is what I think the commissioners want, some of them. And if we don't proceed, I do not read into this statute our ability to continue as a commission.
What if the legislature, point of information, what if the legislature, if
The
they came back
legislature
in and extended our term?
The legislature could extend our term. Some commissioners may stay or not stay, but that would be a legislative decision. But it can't sit, as the way the statute is written, as my understanding of it, that we don't continue after today. Either we were-
Absent legislative action, yes.
Absent legislative action. Legislature can come into session, they can appoint the commission again, they can appoint the same people or different people, there can be a commission, but I don't think this statute allows us to do it. So I'm going
I
to
agree.
proceed on that basis. I'm not a statutory lawyer, but that's what's been told to me by people who have read it. And I think we have at least a motion on the table from Roman, and a proposal, which you all have in front of you. Unless there's any other comments that anybody wants to make on this proposal, I will call a vote. Roman, I assume that you still would like a vote called
yes,
on
indeed.
your proposal.
Yes, indeed.
All right?
Absolutely.
All those in favor of Roman's proposal?
Aye.
Aye.
Barry, you're not voting, or are you voting?
I am voting, and I will abstain with respect to Roman's proposal. I will say I do support in principle increases for both the executive branch salaries and legislative salaries. However, I do not support Roman's proposal as it has been presented.
Okay. All those not in favor? All those abstaining from the vote? And
Guess that would be
that
us.
would
No,
you,
no, and we're not abstaining.
you're
We're
not.
not
abstaining.
voting.
You're not voting, okay? And there are no votes from,
Why don't you ask all those who don't want to do what you were appointed to do in terms of even voting? What's your vote?
well, to me, a non-vote is an abstention, but you can call it whatever you want to call it. We do not have a majority or one from each of the branches of the government who appointed people. Are there any other proposals that anybody wants to make?
I move that we adjourn.
There is a move to adjourn. I assume everybody would be in favor of it. We will report that there will be no report coming out of the commission today. There'll be no action. And according to our understanding of the statute, the commission's work is done. If the legislature does anything, we will see where we are then. I thank you all for your attention. I thank the commissioners for their heartfelt thoughts and opinions. Everybody has been very cooperative, but the commission's work is now over and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Name a commission to make
Good working with you, kid.